talking of these words, what if you explain the term negotiation, mediation, dialogue, and integrative mediation? Because I came across centers which are dialogue centers, and then there is mediation, and now there is integrative mediation. So I would just like to understand all of this.
I would try to make it hopefully rather simply, but please let me know if it was understandable. So in the end, I will start with negotiation. You just negotiate, you find an agreement, and it's done. Mediation is defined as an externally facilitated negotiation. That means that at the core, you still have a negotiation among the different sides. But for whatever reason, the parties were not able to get together, or were not able to come to an agreement by themselves. Why? That's why an external person or external actor enters in order to try to support the parties to come to an agreement. I would say that in peace mediation, this is now a different terminology where I would say mediation among groups in a conflict context, a lot of the work is done actually to build trust to the different parties, to understand the different interests, to understand where there are common interests, and for a longer time to prepare a direct encounter to come to this negotiation moment where the different sides are able, because through external partners, the agenda was discussed, there was trust or confidence built between the different actors. They're actually able to agree on a specific aspect, maybe not the entire conflict, but very specific aspects we're able to agree upon, and only through external support. This is mediation, where mediators or a mediation team are supporting the different sides to come to a negotiated agreement. Now, dialogue is a bit more of an open concept. Dialogue does not need to have negotiation at the core and not an agreement about a specific aspect. So if I have people who are completely segregated, I just have maybe a dialogue about, for example, ecological pollution, or let's say, the role of women in society, maybe a topic that is not particular part of the conflict. You can bring people together who were not in contact before. You can have a facilitated discussion or process where they enter into contact, where they can exchange their different views, but they don't necessarily need to come to an agreement. They don't necessarily have to agree on something. They don't necessarily have to implement something. Of course, a dialogue can also lead to afterwards doing something collaboratively or agreeing, but a dialogue is more open-ended, or is not necessarily having the aim at coming to an agreement. So sometimes the terminology can be misleading, because you always have to see what is the process actually about, and sometimes it's a mediation that is called dialogue, and sometimes it's called a dialogue, but it's a mediation.
Essentially, it would be the dialogue would be the first step. If one has to really see the process, it would be the first step where perspectives are put out in the open.
It can be a first step, and then mediation can maybe follow. But for example, there's often, people are saying, interreligious dialogue. So it's more in a space of exchange without the necessity to agree. For example, let's have once a year a joint gathering, a joint celebration. And then from a dialogue, you can come to a joint agreement. So one does not exclude the other. And oftentimes processes are rather called dialogue in order not to force people, in order to make it more acceptable to the conflict parties. And so some that are in general about reconciliation, about being in contact, are called mediation or peace mediation, while at the very core, there might not even be a negotiation moment. So it's very confusing to use these terminologies, because they're being sometimes accidentally or sometimes on purpose being used in a different way to make them either more acceptable or to grasp more attention.
And what is integrative mediation, in case I missed that?
I didn't talk at all about integrative mediation. We need to consult a lot of actors, and we need to do a lot of actions that are not mediation. We need to do analysis and assessment. We need to build confidence. Maybe we need to do a certain research. We might need to do some fundraising or advocacy for certain aspects. So there's a huge set of activities or actions that we need to do in order to maybe at some point get to mediation among different communities. So integrative mediation tries to convey or tries to integrate a lot of different concepts that are not all mediation, but who are all aiming or trying to come to a mediation setting at some point, to come to agreements from persons or communities from different sides, and to integrate a variety of actors to make sure that both the likelihood of coming to an agreement is relatively high and the agreement does not harm others and has likelihood to sustain.
That makes sense, actually. It's like building up a whole constellation to make sure that one objective which is on the table has many prongs to support it in a way.
So in two sentences, integrative mediation started as a concept where, particularly from the approach, there are many different actions you undertake, not only mediation, but it's always with the aim to get to a mediation setting. And by now, I would say we changed throughout the years the understanding of integrative mediation, or we enlarged it by having more insider mediators, so to integrate more from the context, and to also have a more integrative, one might also say inclusive approach in terms of actors from the context.
Now, before I go right towards the end, can you separate conflict from people?
Yes, I think you can. And that's actually at the very core of not only integrative mediation, but also mediation. You're trying in a process to separate what is the problem, what is the actual problem or conflict, what are the people and their individual interests, and what kind of process do they already went through, or what kind of process could be designed to support them get away from the conflict. There are situations where people are able to make a step back, where they're saying I disagree with large parts of the conflict narratives, and I do think that it's possible to disconnect people or persons from the conflict. It's very difficult for people who live in a conflicting context trying to do that or trying to get there, because the conflict is omnipresent in their day-to-day life. But I do think the conflict came to them. They're overshadowed due to the context by the conflict, but they're not by nature a conflicting person. And that's why the more we can find moments where people can detach from the conflict or can have experiences that are maybe countering the conflict or are not overshadowed by the conflict, or the conflict doesn't play a role in that moment, then it's possible to show that it's possible to detach the conflict and the persons. And I think that's at the core of conflict management, conflict resolution, to believe that it's not by nature or not necessarily only by context that people need to be attached or need to be connected to their conflict all the time, but there is this possibility to make the separation, even though it might sound academic or quite impossible to do. But if there are moments where it's possible, not from one moment to the other side to be freed from the conflict, but if there are moments to be freed from the conflict, then it's already a positive experience from the perspective of conflict resolution.